Hi, welcome to another edition of Curbside Consult. I'm Harold Pollack. I'm delighted to have Michael Hiltzik here with me today, who's the Los Angeles Times columnist and blogger. Also covers business, among other things, and is also the author of The New Deal: A Modern History, now out in paperback. Thanks so much for being with me today.
Well, it's my pleasure. And as I mentioned, it's a particular pleasure to be on with the inventor of the 3x5 card that tells you everything you need to know about personal finance. And as someone who's covered personal finance, I found it very refreshing and bracing to have it boiled down like that.
Well, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm destined to be known for that, even though it took me 90 seconds to write it down, and
well,
I'm sure
that's
that
actually that's what tells you a lot about personal finance.
yeah, I must say that if you actually, it's sort of like hitting the ball low in tennis. If you actually do it, it's great, but it's hard to do. Like saving 20% of your income, at least at a life stage where that's feasible, is hard to do, but it will change your life if you do it.
That's true.
There. So why don't we start? Actually, Obamacare is often compared with the Great Society and the New Deal. Maybe we should start by you just mentioning your book, because I take it that that kind of provides a context through which you see some of these issues.
Uh, yeah, that's true. In fact, anyone who's studied the 30s in particular, the Great Depression and the New Deal, can't help but be struck by the parallels that we've seen this time around, not only in the causes and the sequelae of the crash of 2008, but the response in the political forums to the remedies that have come along, not, and in fact to the remedies themselves. And I found out when I was researching the book, which I started probably in 2007 or 2008, these similarities really were right in front of me all the way. Now, I got into the New Deal in part because I was interested in Social Security. I had written a book about Social Security back during the Bush privatization campaign, and of course, Social Security really was central to the New Deal. And right there, you can see that when the government really upends the status quo with a program of far-reaching social insurance, you see a lot of things happening. It's not easy. It creates a lot of anxiety and opposition. The rollout isn't always very smooth, but the justification for it is very strong, and these programs work.
Well, a couple of interesting parallels. By the way, one thing I should mention is Franklin Roosevelt never took on universal health coverage. That was a bridge too far for him. And when
That's absolutely true. In fact, when he and Francis Perkins and his other advisors were talking about the social insurance program, they actually started not even with old age pensions, they started with unemployment insurance. And that was thought to be the really important part of the Social Security Act. Then, in fact, because of political pressures, things shifted, and pensions were number one, unemployment insurance was number two. They're both in the Social Security Act, and Roosevelt thought that health care would come next or later. But by the time he would have gotten around to it, the nation was heading toward war, and domestic policy was pretty much off the table. So he never did get around to it.
yeah, which and maybe he was right to be wary about biting off too much at the time. The New Deal is also filled with all sorts of compromises that Americans don't remember today. The initial, first of all, there were the compromises with Southern conservatives and segregationists required to pass a lot of these laws, which led to some rather tragic omissions, but also just the fact that he put this basic structure in place that was the best he could do at the time, and since then we've added to it in a variety of ways. That is kind of a useful way to think about what's the long-term view of Obamacare and other social policy changes.
Right. It's very important to think of it that way. In fact, Southern Democrats were the strongest opponents to a lot of New Deal. Although I think everybody fell into line as Social Security. But when Social Security was passed, of course, it was envisioned as a universal program, a universal retirement program. At the very last minute, Robert Morgenthau, Henry Morgenthau, who was Roosevelt's then Treasury Secretary, changed his mind, and the program got ratcheted back really substantially to save money. So domestic employees were taken out of Social Security, farm employees were taken out of it, and these were the classes of people who were most needy. And they were not put back in until the Eisenhower administration. But we're now in 2013, we're as close as we've ever been to Social Security being universal. It was envisioned that way. It didn't end up being enacted that way, just as the Affordable Care Act is envisioned as universal, but it will fall short by a fair margin in at least this initial rollout.
Yeah, if all goes well with the initial rollout, we still will cover about half of the uninsured by the time this is done. Now, some of the people remaining, there's what to do about unauthorized residents of the United States, and there's also what to do about people who know that they could sign up but who just haven't, and the number of dilemmas there. By the way, I should mention one thing about Social Security before we move on, which is that I'm very grateful to that program. I remember very well when my disabled brother-in-law moved into our house, and we had to move him from upstate New York to Illinois, and so he lost all of his Medicaid and everything that related to any kind of a state entitlement, and my mother-in-law's estate was we had to move him because my mother-in-law had died, and so there was a series of logistical complications, and that's monthly Social Security check and Medicare, which just continued with it seamlessly, were really a godsend, and really made it possible for us to take care of him at a difficult moment. And I think I was brought up to believe we should support universal health care and related programs because there are these people out there who need help, and it's really a way that we all protect each other, and that's the fundamental purpose of social insurance, and many of us are beneficiaries of it without ever really having to stop and think about it. Our children are protected if we die soon. If we die suddenly, our children are protected in a variety of ways. The Social Security system has our back without us even really having to think about it.
That's right. That's one of the great things about Social Security. In fact, Social Security advocates say all the time that they really think the system should restore the annual statement, which we used to get in the mail every year, just so that people recognize what benefits they really are eligible for at each stage of their life.